Hello and welcome to another off-kilter episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson. With me today is a guy who meticulously irons his flannels, Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello. I actually am wearing something kind of flannelly right now. Fall starts tomorrow, and where I am, it's getting kind of crisp. Fall.
Favorite time of the year.
Yeah.
It's my favorite time of the year. Very excited. Very excited for the fall. Not excited for any kind of, uptick in COVID or anything like that, but I am excited for the fall season. This month on the show, we'll be taking a trip back to September 1998 with a set of offbeat comedies, so get ready for some uncomfortable laughter because this is Saved by the 90s.
All right, guys, you want news? I got your news right here. Dial 1010-220 and all your long-distance calls from home could cost under $1. You think that's too good to be true? Hey, I tried it. It works. You just dial 1010-220, then 1 and the number, and all your calls up to 20 minutes are only 99 cents. And since it's only 10 cents for each minute over 20, you can talk yourself silly. There's no fee, there's no signing up, no physical exam. Now call somebody before I get ticked off. I'm just kidding. I love you guys.
You're probably too young to remember those 1010-220 and all these. There was this very brief period of time when these long distance providers were coming out with all of these different numbers that you would call to make long distance calls.
Good for them. First up, we have a quirky coming of age comedy about growing up in the lower class parts of Beverly Hills in the 1970s. Marking the feature debut of director Tamara Jenkins and released on September 11th, 1998, this is Slums of Beverly Hills.
Fox Searchlight Pictures presents a comedy with a different perspective.
Like the Forge.
Riskier and funnier than the rest.
We're freaks! Female problems.
Slums of Beverly Hills, rated R. Now playing, coming soon to a theater near you.
In 1976, a lower middle class teenager struggles to cope living with her neurotic family of nomads on the outskirts of Beverly Hills. Ken, we'll start it with you. What did you think of Slums of Beverly Hills?
It's pretty good. I had seen one other Tamara Jenkins film. I'd seen Private Life on Netflix, which is from a couple of years ago, and I really think that's wonderful. I wish that had gotten more discussion when it came out, but now that I've seen another one, I think I can say that I'm a fan of her work.
Yeah, I really liked Private Life as well. That was the one with Paul Giamatti and Catherine Hahn. Really, I think that was definitely an underrated release that year. She also directed The Savages, which I can't remember. I can't remember if I liked that or not, to be honest. I just don't quite remember. I think I did. I think I liked that one. But at any rate, we're talking about Slums of Beverly Hills. This is definitely an offbeat coming-of-age story. Natasha Lyonne is really great in it, and I
love Natasha Lyonne.
I love her in this. I love the aesthetic. I love that kind of kitschy 70s vibe. Love that aesthetic, and I think that they do a really good job with that aesthetic. You have a lot of really good people in here. Also, in addition to Natasha Lyonne, like Alan Arkin, Marissa Tomei is in there. She plays the niece slash cousin of the family who escapes from a detox facility and goes to stay with them. And Alan Arkin, who's sort of the father of the family, is kind of a little bit of a deadbeat kind of guy who just can't really catch a break. And what he does is he takes in Marissa Tomei's character as Rita as he calls his brother and says, I'll take care of her. I'll make sure she goes to nursing school because that's what she wants to do. But you got to help me out financially. So the brother, played by Carl Reiner, totally forgot that the brother was played by Carl Reiner. He's in this. He agrees. He's kind of wealthy, so he agrees and gives them a bunch of money, and things go awry. Things go awry. You have David Krumholtz in there as the older brother.
Yet another Krumholtz appearance on a movie we're discussing on this podcast. Regular listeners to the show will remember, last Thanksgiving we did an episode where like Krumholtz was in like 3 of the 4 or something.
Yeah, Krumholtz, the Krumholtz tally is increasing. He definitely had a pretty prolific career there. We saw him in Addams Family Values and the Santa Claus and the Ice Storm. So that was a threefer, and there's plenty others. There's more '90s Krumholtz that we can dive into. He was good in this one.
Krumholtz is basically an honorary co-host of this show at this point.
we should have him on the show, actually.
Yeah.
And I can grill him about his series, his procedural Numbers that he was in. Remember that? Numbers.
Numbers with the 3 instead of the E.
Yep.
There was one time in when I was in high school where we had like a substitute in one day, and she was given, I think, absolutely no lesson plan at all, and so all she had was she put on an episode of Numbers.
You know what? I think you told that story on here.
It was in a math class, yeah.
That's so amazing. I love it. I was like, I was in a computer class once, and there was one day where we just didn't have anything to do. She put on the movie Pirates of Silicon Valley starring Noah Wyle and Anthony Michael Hall. But I mean, it fit.
Should have put on Hackers.
I know. She missed an opportunity there, lady. Can't remember her name. Kevin Corrigan is in this too. He plays the stoner neighbor Elliot, which there's some really sketchy stuff that happens in this movie. He's probably, I don't know, early 20s. He's probably in his early 20s, his character in this. And Natasha Lyonne's character, Vivian, she's 14, I believe. She's entering high school as a freshman. And they develop a relationship, which is highly illegal. It's mentioned. Yeah. It's mentioned as being illegal.
Did not like that, but neither does the movie.
Yeah. So I mean, at least it recognizes the scuzziness of it.
Did not like that.
Otherwise, though, the character of Elliot's a pretty funny character. I liked Kevin Corrigan in this. Funny story about Kevin Corrigan. One time, I was at a party at a bar, and it was for just some random movie, and Kevin Corrigan was there because he was in the movie, but he was just sitting by himself at the bar, and he didn't talk to anyone the entire night. He just sat there by himself.
I feel that.
Just drinking a beer. Actually, I don't know what he was drinking, but I wanted to go over and just talk to him, but it looked like he was in the kind of mood where he's just like, I don't really feel like being here, and I don't really want to talk to anybody. It was like he was there at an obligation.
Yeah, it's never fun when you're like somewhere because you have to be somewhere, and then you're like,
yeah,
what is the correct amount of time I can be here until I leave and it doesn't seem weird?
I think that was that kind of situation, which, you know what, I can't really blame him, honestly. Like,
we all know what that feels like.
Yeah. Jessica Walters in here. She plays Doris, who is the
what a performance.
Sort of suitor of Alan Arkin's character. She's like kind of the companion. I believe that's what they actually refer to her as a companion in this, and she's really great. There's this really amazing scene when she has these like embroidered dining room chairs, and during their dinner, Vivian ends up getting her period and bleeding on the chair, and Doris loses her mind over it.
You kind of get this feeling that one thing that the movie does well is that it kind of fits all of these different characters and situations. And like, you see her character and you feel like there's a way that this character could be done where she's not going to really fit in well with the rest of this movie. But over time, it really does feel like that she fits in and kind of becomes a part of like this ecosystem of characters and character traits, where even like a character that has such like so many big reactions at first does still become part of the rest of this ensemble in an organic way. And I feel like that's to the testament of Tamara Jenkins's and to the performance. And I think that's an example of something this movie does really well, is that could be just so much going on here as it goes back and forth between these characters and these perspectives, but it really does keep them all unified as a part of this whole pretty effortlessly.
There's this constant sort of controlled chaos happening in the movie that I think really, in the hands of many other directors, I think that it wouldn't work at all, and it would just feel really, really sloppy and just all over the place and just too much. There's too much going on here because you have what is essentially a cast of characters with all of whom have really intense personalities. And I think that one thing that Jenkins does so well in this movie is she's able to balance that intensity. And even though you have these really wild scenes where there's like a million things happening at once and everybody's fighting, and somehow it all fits together and as I said, feels kind of controlled in that regard.
Yeah, I think there is a really underrated trait for a filmmaker, and it's knowing when to cut away from something when that information has been conveyed, and when to go longer would kind of throw the pacing off. Because for as much as that happens in this movie, it's only about an hour and a half long, but it doesn't feel rushed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that you have this really wonderful cast of very colorful characters, all having their own unique, colorful personalities, and it all just works extremely well. I think that the script is very funny, and it's a movie that I think definitely holds up. I think partially because of the time period that it's set in, but also because I think that the comedy in it is sort of universal. It doesn't like go for whatever specific type of comedy was, in vogue during that moment in time. It feels like more of sort of a broad comedy. I mean, there's some like kind of gross out stuff in it and some kind of like provocative stuff in there, but nothing like too over the top or anything like that. I would say like the biggest things that happen are the scene that we already mentioned where Vivian hooks up with Elliot, which is an unfortunate scene. And then there's another scene that happens with Murray and Marissa Tomei's character that she kind of comes out of nowhere and feels really dirty, and I would say is almost not necessary. I mean, since we're blanket spoilers on this podcast, it's the scene when he basically feels her up, and it's his niece, which is
No, it's
I didn't feel like it added enough to the narrative to sort of justify its existence. Because I mean, I can understand where they were coming from with it. It was, Alan Arkin he's a lonely guy. Even though he has his family, he feels like he can't catch a break, and he is in a relationship with this woman who doesn't allow him to touch her, and so he had physical needs, but I still felt like it undoes a lot of the goodwill that we had with that character. The fact that he allowed himself, the fact that he even had a momentary desire to put his hand down his niece's shirt like that, I felt like it just left a bad taste in my mouth about the whole thing. Which is unfortunate, because it's like one of the very few ticks that I had, at least, against this movie, which I still really enjoyed overall. I've watched this movie multiple times at this point, and I still really enjoy it regardless. Next up, we have a biopic about comedy writer Jerry Stahl and his ongoing battle with addiction, directed by David Velaz and released on September 18th, 1998. This is Permanent Midnight.
I get it. You're like this Hemingway type who sold out to Hollywood.
Jerry, I can get you a job. I know the producers.
She was beautiful, she was witty, and she had no idea who Lily was.
You're always late, you're erratic.
I know this looks bad, but I swear it's worse than it seems.
Get out! Whoa! You're now obligated to stand here and give me 5 minutes.
Permanent Midnight, rated R.
You're coming back, right?
Ben Stiller plays comedy writer Jerry Stahl, whose $6,000 a week heroin habit had him taking his infant daughter along on his drug runs and doing smack during TV script conferences. Departing detox, Stahl explores memories with survivor Kitty, who listens patiently to Stahl's flashback. Other women in Stahl's life are his British wife Sandra and agent Vola. So, Adam, let's start off with you here. What did you think of Permanent Midnight?
Permanent Midnight, I totally forgot that I had seen this movie before. When we were discussing it, I just sort of forgot it even existed, to be honest with you. And then when we were picking out the movies for this month, I saw it on the list and was like, oh my God, like I remember that movie. And then as I was watching, it was like one of those deals where it all just sort of comes flooding back to you. And I remember I saw this like well after it came out, like years later. And because I remember up to that point only seeing Ben Stiller in comedies, and to see him in a dramatic role, I think was a little jarring at first. But then after, 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe of this movie, you realize like he's a really good dramatic actor. And I think that this was sort of in a lot of ways, a breakout role for him, because he just did such an amazing job playing Jerry Stahl. Overall, I think that it's a decent movie. I'm not super into movies about addiction, so it kind of had that going for it. And I think that after seeing a movie like Trainspotting handle addiction way better than this, it maybe dilutes it a little bit, but I think overall you still had some good performances in there. And I think that Jerry Stahl's life is an interesting one.
Yeah, I have no complaints with Stiller's performance in this movie at all, but I wasn't really taken by this as a whole. I feel like it never really settles on the way it wants to tell the story. And so it always has this feeling of a movie that's trying to figure out what to do and trying to figure out exactly how it's going to cover its events and its timeline and the perspective it wants to take in getting there. And it tries sort of tacitly so many times that eventually it just feels like it's spinning its wheels, and then eventually it's over.
Yeah, the whole like flashback thing where he's talking to Maria Bello for like large portions of it, and then like all of a sudden we're in present, and then it picks up from there. Mm-hmm. It does feel a little bit disjointed.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to quantify it beyond that point. It's a competently made movie. It feels like it has a sufficient amount of ground to cover, but it doesn't really cover that ground in a very logical way at times.
It's one of these situations where I feel like hearing stories from the real Jerry Stahl is a bit more fascinating than watching this movie. And now I never read the book. This is based on the memoir by Jerry Stahl about his life. And something tells me that the book probably handles all this material much better. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's probably written in the first person and he's telling these stories about his ups and downs with addiction and all of that, something tells me that it just works better than the way that it's set up in this narrative.
Yeah, there is this strange, I think there is, in a sense, and this is not an observation that I'm just having, this is something that I've thought about a lot and other people have said. There is this strange desire to make every thing and every story, fictional or nonfiction, that all roads eventually lead to film, which I think is a very misguided conception. Like, there's nothing about this, from what I understand, that inherently says that there's the best way to communicate this story and these messages to an audience most effectively would be to adapt it into a film, or at least that every, especially nonfiction book, especially every memoir, needs to necessarily translate into film. So I feel like there is something missing here, and not having read the book, I can't comment specifically what it is, but it absolutely feels like something that was adapted, like, because it was felt like it should be.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that we're having this conversation, because I literally had this conversation a day ago about The Devil All the Time, the Netflix movie. It was like the exact same conversation. Like, probably works better as a novel. I don't think it needed to be adapted.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
I really wish that they, first of all, I wish that they were able to, and I know that they probably wouldn't be able to get the rights, but I wish that they were able to actually have. He worked on the TV show Alf, and I wish that they were able to actually use Alf's likeness in this, because I think that would have added a lot to it, to the comedy of it all, have it being actually Alf. And there's also a really funny anecdote that Jerry Stahl tells about how he used to work. He got hired to work on Twin Peaks and write for Twin Peaks, and he wrote a script for an episode, and he turned it in, and it was covered in blood, and he got fired from Twin Peaks. Because evidently the script was like completely incomprehensible, and it was covered in blood and turned in late.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Jerry Stahl would go on to write the scripts for Bad Boys and Bad Boys 2.
We've talked about Bad Boys on the show.
Yeah. Written by Mr. Jerry Stahl, who this movie is about. Played by Ben Stiller. He would go on to have a pretty big career. He wrote he wrote a number of CSI episodes. From what I understand, some of the more highly regarded episodes of CSI were his episodes.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to think about. Okay, let me parse this thought for a second, because before I restart and try again. Yeah, like, okay, so now I'm having this weird recollection to so for some reason when I was younger, when I was more of a kid really, I had this weird fascination with like the Wikipedia list for like TV shows, like how you would have like real, in a strange roundabout way, was one of my like weird early forays into like thinking about how works were, made and produced in the production like process, because you would have on these Wikipedia lists the director and the writer credits on these tables. And now that you mention that, like somewhere in the deep recesses of my memory, like the name Jerry Stahl sounds familiar. Like I might have just been browsing through these lists for whatever reason, because I was like a little kid, and little kids have weird fascinations, or at least I did. And for some reason, the name Jerry Stahl now sounds very familiar to me. Like somewhere in the deep recesses of my brain, I've definitely read this name before. Now that you mentioned the CSI connection, I don't know. I think I'm just filling time on this podcast now. So
Owen Wilson is in here as one of Jerry's drug buddies, plays Nicky, and I could have done with a little bit more of Owen Wilson's character. I thought he was quite funny. I enjoyed him in this. We had Fred Willard in there as well. I could have used more Fred Willard, but you can always use. We can
always use more Fred Willard.
Jeannie Garofalo's in there too. This is the first of 2 movies that she's in that we'll be discussing this month. And I'm surprised that we haven't really talked about Jeannie Garofalo more, because she was one of these like prolific 90s actors. And I'm sure that we will be talking about more of her movies, but man, she just dominated the 90s. she was at everything.
Yeah, we love talking about recurring actors on this show.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
As based on our podcast, which sometimes I guess doubles as the Krumholtz cast.
The Krumholtz cast. Yeah, I mean that's sort of the unfortunate thing, is like I feel like Ben Stiller's really the only one who has much to work with in this movie.
No, like that's another big problem.
Like everyone else, it feels so underutilized. I mean, Elizabeth Hurley, who plays his sort of wife, Sandra, and the mother of their child, like, she's just this kind of generic, like, ex-wife, mother figure. Like, there's just not enough going on here.
No. And it's another thing that feels like it was just written in a somewhat haphazard way, is that there's this want to tell this story, and there's this want to tell it in a particular way, but it's not settled upon on what that approach means. And so that affects not only the structure and the layout of the movie, but it also means that it feels considerably underwritten at times.
Yeah, and the thing that bothered me a little bit more about it was that it felt disjointed in that it was almost like it was just like kind of segments. It was just like, oh, this drug thing happened, then this drug thing happened, then there was this one time I hooked up with this lady and it was a drug thing. And it was like, I mean, I get that those are probably the most interesting or notable things that happened to him as he was on his like journey to rock bottom, but there was no like connective tissue in there. Like, we heard little bits and pieces about his career along the way, but it was mostly just vertical slices of his life where something drug related happened in them. And it just didn't feel like it was a proper overview of this person's life. Like, it didn't necessarily feel like a biopic per se. It felt more like these are just crazy things that happened when I was on dope, you know? Like, like you make a movie that's just a compilation of every time you got drunk at a party, and it just doesn't work.
No, it eventually does feel like film is the wrong medium to tell this story, but as we've been saying, there seems to be a problem where a film does not recognize that sometimes it's not the right medium to effectively communicate a story or a message.
Yeah. Yep. It's unfortunate because as I just wanted to reiterate that I think Ben Stiller did a really incredible job in this, and it looked like he underwent some kind of crazy transformation, because at one point he just looks half dead in this. He just looks like he loses a ton of weight, and he just looks so gaunt and emaciated. But yeah, so I think he does a great job, but unfortunately I think that the movie's just not great, especially when you have something like Trainspotting, that I think that even though that's a much different movie, it's still sort of it's sort of a dark comedy about addiction, and I think that one works a lot better than this.
An ugly germ. Catch it, and it could really get ugly. And the worst part is, germs live on all kinds of things, even things we touch every day. But now there's Purell Instant Hand Sanitizer. Purell is clinically proven to kill germs on your hands that may cause disease without water or towels. So use it often, anytime, any place.
Mom. Oh, I don't know, Joey. It's pretty scary.
To help stay well, Purell.
I'd like to take this interlude in the show to remind everyone to wash their hands and wear a mask.
Bet you didn't know that Purell came out in 1998, huh?
No.
Yeah, around September of 1998, if that commercial is to be believed.
I mean, it had to come around at some point, I guess, but I did not know it was.
Fun fact, here's another fun fact. Febreze came out around that same time, because as I was researching commercials from September 1998, I found another one that was like introducing Febreze.
For September 1998, a banner month in cleaning.
There you go.
After covering Serial Mom on our April episode, we were excited to dive back into some 90s John Waters, and for September, our desire has come to fruition. Released on September 25th, this is Pecker.
Pecker! My name is Pecker.
Pecker is a small-town boy with big-time talent.
I'd love to give you a show in my New York gallery.
And now the New York art world can't get enough Pecker. But Pecker's had it with overexposure.
I don't want to be
be in Vogue. Everybody wants to be in Vogue.
Edward Furlong and Christina Ricci in the new film directed by John Waters.
Supermodel.
Pecker.
Now playing at select theaters.
A Baltimore sandwich shop employee becomes an overnight sensation when photographs he's taken of his weird family become the latest rage in the art world. The young man is called Pecker because he pecks at his food like a bird. Oh, there we go. Now we know the synopsis. The two-sentence synopsis takes the time to explain why he's called Pecker. Oh boy, Ken, what were your initial impressions of Pecker?
I'm always gonna like any opportunity that we have to talk about John Waters on this show, but this isn't really my favorite Waters movie in terms of enjoyability, but I feel like it does actually. I feel like anything from any single movie at John Waters' career is really interesting to talk about contextually, because as we said when we were talking about Serial Mom, he just has this fascinating trajectory that I feel like no other director before or since will ever exactly have this particular arc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really liked Pecker when it first came out. I've been a big John Waters fan since as far back as I can remember. My parents liked John Waters, and they sort of exposed me to John Waters movies, probably at too young of an age. But yeah, I really liked Pecker back in the day. I will say that I still like Pecker a lot, although I think I have cooled on it a little bit since seeing it as a kid. I think it's interesting watching it now, though, because I think back then I just sort of watched it for what it was. And now when I watch it, I think that I see a lot of John Waters in the character of Pecker. And that's just not really something I picked up on back then. But, watching it now, it's just like, wow, it seems like this is John Waters sort of making a movie about himself in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. Just this idea of this character whose art becomes this kind of rage of a particular level of establishment, but at the same time it feels deeply that it feels like there's nothing more deeply strange and perverse to him than like that level of acceptance and everything that it brings, and that kind of parallels that thing that John Waters often talks about in his career, where like the strangest moment for him was when he made Hairspray, a movie that got a PG rating, or a movie and after that movie was a success, that he had like studios coming to him with offers to finance his next movie. And so there is this kind of push-pull between like the art that one is making and then kind of what it means when it enters the confines of like the so-called art world.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting exploration. And I think that also one of the things that the movie grapples with, and I'm sure that this is something that John Waters grapples with every one of his movies, is the exploitation of sort of the subjects of his movies. I think that he is very careful not to make his art exploitative, but at the same time, there is always that sort of threat where, in this movie, Pecker takes all these pictures around town, this little neighborhood that he lives in Baltimore, and it blows up. But at the same time, it hurts a lot of the people in his neighborhood. It hurts his family because of this, and it really kind of straddles that line between exploitation and sort of acknowledging or celebrating your neighborhood and the people who live in it.
Yeah, it really is that kind of yeah, and a major thing there is that he's just taking these pictures of people. They're not necessarily agreeing that they're going to become part of his art. It's just him unilaterally deciding that this is the subject of my next photograph, and he's maybe even not as much as that. It's just the way that the film depicts him doing it is that it's just an extension of who he is. He's always going to carry around this camera, and at basically every interaction that he has, he will take a picture.
Yeah, I think that the concept of using subjects of a movie for exploitation and the discussion of that in general, like, and maybe we'll talk about it at some point on this show, but American Movie comes to mind, the documentary American Movie, where a lot of people criticized that film for being exploitative against those two guys. So I think that it is kind of a fascinating topic to explore, just in general.
Yeah, and it never feels superfluous to have a discussion like this about, especially a John Waters movie, because all of them do seem to have this. All of them are, this is a social satire and a social commentary as much as all of his work is. So,
So you have Edward Furlong in there as Pecker. This is pretty much at the peak of Edward Furlong's career. I think he did Detroit Rock City after this one. I think that came out in 99.
Discussed on a previous episode.
Yep.
We're getting to that point where we can talk about all these movies.
I know. I love it. We're at like over 100, I think. So yeah, there's going to be lots more connections happening.
Maybe one day we'll arrive at a central unified theory of 90s filmmaking, or maybe not.
I hope so.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
I don't know. We gotta figure this out.
Christina Ricci is in there as well as Shelley. She plays the girlfriend. This is around the time where she was starting to do more sort of art house type stuff. I think when did Buffalo 66 come out? I feel like that had to be around this time, somewhere around here that Buffalo 66 came out. Yeah, same year, 98. And this was after The Opposite of Sex, which was the one that I think really kind of pushed her into the sort of indie film scene. And that was sort of the one where she went from being like looked at as a child actor to like a woman actor. Like when she sort of became almost a sex symbol, not a sex symbol, that's an incorrect term, but when she started being looked at as an actual adult actor. So she's pretty good in this. I like that she's obsessed with, she owns, I guess she owns the laundromat. I don't know if she just works there or owns it, but
I don't think we ever see anyone else working there.
Yeah, I think she does own it. She's obsessed with like laundry, everything about laundry, from new cleaners to techniques to just making sure that everything. She just runs a tight ship at her laundromat.
Like me with lists of things on the internet, apparently.
Go. Yeah. You have
tie it back into this rest of the show.
Yeah, Brian Sexton III in there, who was also a really big. He had quite the indie movie career in the 90s with Empire Records, another movie that we talked about previously. Welcome to the Dollhouse. Did we talk about that? I think we did.
Did we?
I thought we did. Maybe not.
I don't think we have.
Maybe not.
He was in Empire Records, which we have talked about.
Yeah. So yeah, big career for him during this time. He was in Boys Don't Cry too. Came out in 99. And then of course you have a lot of kind of Waters mainstays like Mink Stoll and Patty Hearst, and you have a lot of non-actors in here as well, a lot of neighborhood people.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting to be said here, because we previously discussed Serial Mom a few months ago, and just examining from the 4 years between Serial Mom and Pecker, they feel in some ways like quite different movies. Like if you could almost bifurcate Waters' 90s run further, even just between this idea that he was making these movies that had mid-budget backing. It almost feels like, you have what feels like a very mainstream iteration of a Waters movie with Serial Mom. But then by the time you get to Pecker, you're kind of getting into more, I don't know, specific styles of humor, specific angles of satire that feel in some way less mainstream, and then you can kind of track that approach further to Cecil B. Demented, and then to A Dirty Shame, when I think, as we discussed, you get to that point where the landscape of like film financing has changed so much that you can't get movies made on budgets quite this big anymore, so he kind of stops making movies.
Yeah. I think I do think that you can see that the sort of stylistic change in Pecker. I feel like you can see it a little bit in Serial Mom too, but definitely Pecker, I think, is the start of that. When you look at Cecil B. Demented and even A Dirty Shame, those three movies definitely carry a different sort of tone than his previous filmography, for sure. Even though there's a lot of the same people, and a lot of the comedy is still sort of that kind of quirky, sometimes gross out style. Pecker still feels like a more mainstream Waters title.
Yeah, but it feels like you could kind of come up with maybe a superfluous theory on connecting it to Cecil B. Demented to A Dirty Shame.
Oh yeah, I think my favorite character was Martha Plimpton's character in this. I think she was so great. She was so funny in this. I really loved her character as Tina. She was Pecker's older sister. I think that some of the comedy just did not work for me, and still does not work for me in this movie. Of the little Chrissy character that is obsessed with sugar, and that whole thing where they put her on Ritalin and all of that stuff. Like, I just none of that really landed for me. And then and also the grandma, how she had that the Virgin Mary statue that she made talk. It lent itself to some humorous moments, but overall I was just like, nah.
Yeah,
I mean, it felt like it was almost a little bit too oddball. Like, it was just a little bit too out there.
Yeah, and I think, at the risk of getting bogged down in the, decidedly lethally loaded term mainstream, if you kind of decide that, like, maybe there's a point where the rest of the film world is ready to meet John Waters at his level, if you say the peak of that maybe comes at some point around Serial Mom, it then feels like they're kind of crossing in some other direction by Pecker. Or maybe I'm just, extrapolating based on information unknowable during production, like how the film performed financially, in which case this is a largely, probably backwards form of logic. But I think there's something about this that definitely does separate it, that makes it feel like we're having a different discussion than we would when we were talking about Serial Mom. But for one is, I kind of want to say, I think the evidence that I have here that this didn't really work for me is that the thing about a John Waters movie is that it's always such a fascinating world, and there's always so much fascination in like the specific way that he creates dialogue. And while I was fascinated by it, I didn't really laugh at all very much that happens in it. Like, a John Waters movie that I don't find particularly funny is still probably going to be the most interesting movie I see that entire week that I watch it.
I still enjoyed it. I found it mildly humorous. I feel like I still liked it more than Cecil B. Demented. I guess I have to rewatch that to.
I think there's something kind of fascinating about Cecil B. Demented that really does. Fascinating, I think, in its own particular way, that I would think about it more than that I would probably rewatch it before I'd rewatch Pecker.
Yeah. I remember Cecil B. Demented was like an early DVD of mine. It was like one of the first DVDs I bought was Cecil B. Demented.
I mean, if there's any one DVD you're gonna buy out of any of them, you buy a John Waters movie for the commentary.
Yep. There you go. Our final film this month is a darkly comedic crime thriller starring Joaquin Phoenix, Vince Vaughn, and Janine Garofalo. Released on September 25th and directed by David Dobkin, this is Clay Pigeons.
Gramercy Pictures invites you to experience.
Come on.
Come on.
A two-timing,
You're sleeping with one victim. You're dating another.
suicidal,
There ain't a whole lot left.
homicidal,
Alarm! What is that? That's a dead person.
serial killing,
I love the open water.
comedy.
Crazy.
Vince Vaughn,
I'm Lester the molester.
Janine Garofalo,
Could you not poke the body with a stick, please?
Joaquin Phoenix.
Promise you'll stop finding dead people.
Clay Pigeons.
We'll see you.
Rated R. Starts tomorrow.
What is that music choice?
I don't. It was like big band music.
That is completely not correct for this.
Nope.
Clay is a young man in a small town who witnesses his friend, Earl, kill himself because of the ongoing affair that Clay is having with the man's wife, Amanda. Feeling guilty, Clay now resists his widow when she presses him to continue with their affair. Clay inadvertently befriends a serial killer named Lester Long, who murders the widow in an attempt to, quote, help his fishing buddy, unquote. That is, like I said, every month we get a completely incomprehensible plot description that I guess is almost correct, but I don't know what those words were supposed to mean. Anyway, Adam, start us off. What did you think of Clay Pigeons?
I didn't like Clay Pigeons very much.
No, it's a bad movie.
It's not for me. You know, I think that I did see this before, but I don't really remember it. I remember when it came out, I really wanted to see it, but I also remember people just, it was really reviled by critics back when it first came out. I do remember that very distinctly. And either rewatching it or watching it now, I gotta say, yeah, I was just not on board. Just not on board with this one. It had its moments, but for the most part, I found it to be too mean-spirited to be really very funny and like annoying. I found myself being annoyed. Like Vince Vaughn's character, you know, if you've seen Vince Vaughn in movies like Swingers or Made, sort of his early comedic roles, this is like 10 times that. It's like he's so over the top in this. You're just like, just cool it, man. I can't take it anymore. But there were just certain things about this movie that really got under my skin, and I just could not get into.
No.
Mostly the treatment of women in this movie. I mean, just
it's
unbelievable.
It's repulsive.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like the way that not only that female characters are treated in this movie, the way that they're written also just bad.
Yeah, it's just every character is this like just lame archetype, and there are just no redeeming qualities to most of the characters, and you know, you have Janine Garofalo in there as the closest thing to a female lead, really, and even her character is just so underwritten and like generic. Like this is a character that we've seen so many times before, and they make all of the women in this movie, even though like I can't remember her name, the Amanda character, Georgina Cates, even though they make her like a very strong-willed character, she's always at the mercy of a man, like no matter what. Like I'm not sure that this, I don't think there's any way that this movie's going to pass the Bechdel test.
No, it's chaos. This movie is chaos, and not in a good way.
No. Yeah, it's like one of those dark comedies that is never able to find its footing, and it's never able to sort of make the dark elements work in such a way that it's both funny and, dark. Like I think that there's some movies that are able to do dark comedy well, like, I don't know, Fargo, for instance. And then there's movies like Clay Pigeons that just fail at it miserably and manage to not be funny or particularly captivating in its crime elements.
Yeah, here's the thing, is that if you make a dark comedy about a lot of murders, you really need to figure out exactly what tone you're going for, because otherwise it's just not going to work at all. It's going to feel wildly discordant, and this movie is wildly discordant.
It just...
with a few okay performances sprinkled in that save it from feeling like complete death the entire way through to watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a complete waste of time. Joaquin Phoenix does a pretty decent job in this, and I did like Janine Garofalo's character. I thought she was pretty funny.
Yeah, to whatever, I don't know how many stars I gave this on Letterboxd, but at least one full one is for the Janine Garofalo character.
Yeah. I mean, she was really the only redeeming quality of the movie at all. Like, Joaquin Phoenix, I think his performance is fine, but I think his character is severely lacking. Like, this guy's he's just a lame nobody. Like, I didn't care what happened to him the entire time. Like, I just did not give a crap about him. And then Vince Vaughn's character is just this over the top. He's a serial killer, and we don't really know what his motivations are, other than that he hates women and wants to murder them all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's also some like kind of pedophilia elements in this movie as well, where he wants to. I mean, I don't know how old that waitress is, but according to Joaquin Phoenix's character Clay, she's very young. So there's some nastiness going on in this movie as well.
Can't we just have one month where there's not something terrible happening in these movies? Just 1 month where the.
I was kind of thinking like, oh, the offbeat comedies, this might be kind of fun.
There was a lot lacking in what passed for offbeat comedy in 1998.
Now, yeah, I mean, to be clear, like, it was sort of like our definition of offbeat comedy, but I think it's pretty safe to say that most of these movies could be safely considered an offbeat comedy.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I think I was just using the term very broadly. And I think at some level they would probably think of the movie as being thought of in a similar way. I do also want to add, for the record, this movie features what feels to me like a very 90s film tradition that kind of doesn't happen much anymore. Movies set in like the Great Plains, like the High Plains, like the Mountain West almost.
Oh, yeah.
Feel like you get a lot of those in the 90s. You don't really get those anymore.
Also, that opening title sequence felt very 90s to me, like just the font choices. A lot of just a strong 90s font choice.
You can really tell a movie by its font choices, and I'm being completely serious when I say that.
Yeah.
If you want the exact location of the film, the always very helpful and accurate IMDb trivia page tells us in the single most popular trivia item, 11 out of 11 finding it interesting. Though never spoken in the film, the name of the town where it's set is Mercer, Montana, according to the script. The local population of the fictional town is 1,536, and then I love it that it adds, though it drops over the course of the film.
Because people get murdered.
Yes, 11 out of 11 found this interesting. Also, while looking at the IMDb page, I found this spectacular on the goofs section. The sheriff's badge has 6 points, but his SUV has a 7-point star on the door. Filed under continuity.
Those idiots.
Yeah, entire movie ruined now.
Get your sheriff's stars right, idiots.
So, if you ever want to know what they're going to talk about if they do a cinema sins of Clay Pigeons, I assume that.
Everything wrong with Clay Pigeons.
Since apparently, according to that corner of the internet, that is how you watch movies.
You have, speaking of the sheriff, you have the late Scott Wilson in there as the sheriff. I liked his character in this too. He wasn't in it a lot, but I did enjoy his role here as well. Mm-hmm. And that's really all I can say about Clay Pigeons. It felt very, very much like the sort of quirky crime comedies, dark comedies that we were getting around this time. Like, didn't feel... It carried the same kind of tone as like a movie like Go, like one of those, which we talked about on the show.
Yeah. And so you do have these movies that are coming along, and as you said, like Go being another example. But everybody wants to make a movie like this around this time. But what is important to realize is that those are movies that are so tonally difficult to get right that if you don't get it right, as this movie does not, most of the time everyone's just staring at the screen completely expressionless.
Yeah, I'll give you another example of a movie that does this, and that's Very Bad Things, which also came out in 1998. It came out in November of 98, but that's another dark comedy that I think is extremely mean-spirited and does not work on any level and just feels like a gross, dirty movie that shouldn't exist. And they just that was Peter Berg actually that did that one, and I really hated Very Bad Things.
Peter Berg
really hated Very Bad Things. Like, I just even as a young person seeing that movie, I just knew how gross it was.
Very Bad Things. Very bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Fun fact, Very Bad Things stars Jon Favreau. This movie stars Vince Vaughn. There you go. Got your Vaughn Favreau.
Yeah. I mean, I was about to say, this is like there's a lot of people in this movie that feel like they're, in around these times, like movies we're talking here, that feel like they're on the rise. So it's interesting to catch them at a pivotal moment in their career. This would have also been the year of the Psycho remake, would it not have been, that Vince Vaughn played Norman Bates in?
Oh yeah. This this is 2 years after Swingers. I still really like Swingers, like that. I still stand behind that movie. Can't really stand behind. Oh, and it's the same year that Return to Paradise came out too, which is also really bad. But that was a dramatic role for him, and I remember being surprised to see him in a dramatic role.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to like trace a career at a particular point in time, and it's good to talk about that because there's not a whole lot else to talk about with this movie after a point.
No, I don't think it's worth your time. Like, I don't know. David Dobkin for me in general is...
Oh yeah, David Dobkin.
He's not really my type of director. Like, looking at his filmography, I liked exactly one movie that he made, and that was Wedding Crashers. Mm-hmm. And something tells me if I don't know if I watched Wedding Crashers now, I'm not sure that I would like it as much as I did back in 2003, but either way, all of his he most recently did that Eurovision Song Contest movie with Will Ferrell, and
thought it was okay. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw it. I didn't like it.
I thought it was okay. I thought there were some good moments in it.
There were a couple good moments, but I didn't think that it justified the 2+ hour runtime of it.
He's like 120 something minutes long.
I don't know. I thought Rachel McAdams was good in it, and I thought Dan Stevens was good in it, but
I love Dan Stevens in it.
Yeah, he was great. But
and then there's that one scene where there's that big medley in the middle of it.
That was fun.
Loved it.
Yeah, that was fun. But the movie did not work for me at all. Dave Dobkin also did Fred Claus, which was awful, and Mr. Woodcock, and The Change Up, which was the body swap movie with Jason Bateman and Ryan Reynolds, and Shanghai Nights. So
what a career of movies that I actually don't know very much about. I can't tell you anything about the David Dobkin films.
And then he did The Judge in 2014, which was the one with Robert Duvall and Robert Downey Jr., which I didn't see. I heard was not very good, but it just doesn't seem to fit with his other movies. At any rate.
R.I.P.D. and King Arthur, Legend of the Sword.
Oh, yeesh. Yeesh. I do like that his photo on IMDb looks like it's from the 2006 MTV Movie Awards. So,
David Dobkin at an event for 2006 MTV Movie Awards, open parenthetical, 2006, close parenthetical.
I kind of like that.
I mean, I like it too.
I mean, it's not like the Terrence Malick photo or anything, but it's up there.
It's pretty close. I think in a way that feels like it has similar energy to the Terrence Malick photo, and in a strange way.
Nothing will ever beat the Terrence Malick photo.
Oh, obviously not. I'm just looking at it now, and I feel joy all over again.
I'm telling you right now, if somebody changes that, I will change it back. I will log in there and change it back. I think a lot of people would jump on that and immediately change it back.
The problem is that there are 3 photos on his photo gallery, and 2 of them are variants of that photo.
Yep.
So there should only be those 2. The other one, that's just him looking annoyed at someone taking a picture of him on set. That one should be gone, because all we need is this one and this same photo again in black and white.
Yeah, that's all we need.
In a strange way, maybe it should be the black and white one. It feels like it adds more mystery. Because it's and grainy.
Anyway, Clay Pigeons, avoid.
Yeah. Once again, it should tell you that something about Clay Pigeons that we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about people's IMDb photos.
Oh my. That's how we do it. Anything else to add about Clay Pigeons before we wrap it up?
No, that's about it.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for this month. Thank you so much for joining us. You can visit 90spod.com for more episodes and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at 90spod to join the community. If you have a moment, please consider reviewing us on iTunes. That would be super helpful. Stay tuned for our Halloween special next month. I'm very excited for that. Until then, for Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.